Welcome to this course titled Formative Assessment, as designed and produced by the Region 11 Service Center. In this course, you'll be able to learn about the importance of formative assessments and how they're a teacher's best friend because they inform their next steps and drive instruction. Several examples of formative assessments will be offered, and the teacher will build in 2 or 3 within their mini-lesson to gauge student progress. The amount and type of formative assessments will vary within the lesson cycle, but it's important to formally assess frequently. It's important to note that some educational experts use the term formative assessment, while others use the phrase checks or checking for understanding. You're going to hear both terms today and know that they're synonymous in this presentation. For today's presentation, you'll want to have handy several of your resources. A copy of Focus by Mike Schmoker, The First Days of School by Wong and Wong, and Teach Like a Champion 2.0 by Doug Lemov. We'll spend most of our time in Lemov's book. Here we have our rubric for the Formative Assessment Learning Objective. At the conclusion of this course, you'll have an opportunity to demonstrate your understanding of the Stated Learning Objective by participating in a demonstration lab sponsored by Region 11 certification team. During the lab, you'll present a 10-minute mini-lesson in which you interweave 2 to 3 formative assessments throughout your lesson. You'll receive feedback based on the proficiency rubric you see on the screen. And to earn credit for this course, participants must score at the proficient or master's level. So, get yourself settled, grab a copy of your 3 resources, and let's get started. Let's start with laying the foundation of formative assessment by building some background knowledge. Mike Schmoker says he prefers the term checks for understanding over formative assessment. Furthermore, he emphasizes how important it is to check and assess student mastery as they're practicing each step of the lesson. Pause the video now and read pages 55 to 56 of Focus. You'll read the section titled The Consequences of Typical Poorly Built Lessons. On this slide we have the quote, "For progress to be made, there must be constant assessment for learning." Harry and Rosemary Wong discuss the importance of feedback in their landmark book, The First Days of School. In their words, teachers must formatively assess and give feedback so that all students can progress toward mastery of the learning objective or target. Pause the video now and read pages 268 to 269 of The First Days of School. You'll read to the end of page 269. When you assess, you help. In The First Days of School, the Wongs assure us that assessing assists both students and the teacher. On page 269, they write, "To help students reach the highest possible level achievement, the effective teacher is constantly assessing for student learning. This helps students go where they need to go, and it helps them determine how best to get there." Paul Bambrick-Santoyo, in the book Driven by Data, cautions us about how formative assessments assess learning up to a certain point. We must continue to assess what students are practicing or they run the risk of forgetting about those skills. He writes about this anecdote. "I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a teacher check for understanding in the classroom and see that the students have mastered the material only to find out that a month later they're no longer able to show the same mastery." Thus, formative assessments need to be done more frequently and need to encompass ongoing standards. In a future module, you'll learn about summative assessments. Formative assessments are spiraled in throughout a unit of study so the teacher can adjust instruction. The goal is that students can show their mastery on a summative assessment. Summative assessments are given at the end of a unit when you want to sum up what the student has learned and then determine a grade. They can help determine the effectiveness of teaching. Take a moment and do a quick check for understanding on your own. How would you describe formative assessment? Hopefully, you feel great about the first question. As a reminder, Schmoker says that formative assessment is done when the teacher checks to see how many students have mastered a particular step. Some examples include thumbs up, thumbs down, dry erase boards, or red, yellow, green popsicle sticks. The next question to ask yourself is, how and when do you implement formative assessment? Let's continue to our third question. And last, what's the purpose of formative assessment? You may have some ideas about the second and third questions, but if you still feel a bit uncertain, it's okay. The remainder of this presentation will give you more information about the how, when, and why of formative assessment. Let's now drill down a bit deeper to see some examples of other formative assessments and the purposes behind each. Doug Lemov goes deeper into formative assessment by offering a variety of techniques that check for student understanding. We'll look at 5 in this presentation. Lemov, in fact, uses and prefers the term Check for Understanding, or CFU, throughout Teach Like a Champion 2.0. In the section you are about to read, Lemov mentions that there are 4 tasks of CFU. As you read, focus on the 3 most important tasks he highlights within these pages. Pause the video now and read pages 24 through 26 of Teach Like a Champion 2.0. You'll read until the end of the chapter. Lemov's first checking for understanding technique is to reject self-report. This means that we need to get rid of rhetorical questions and replace them with more objective forms of assessment. When we ask students questions like, "Got it?" or "Are you good with the differences between plant and animal cells?" we really don't get the data we need to inform our next steps. Instead, we need to ask a quick series of carefully chosen questions directed at a strategic sample of the class, with the goal of assessing student understanding in a minute or less. For more information on Reject Self-Report, check out Technique 1 of Teach Like a Champion, pages 30 to 34. Lemov's second checking for understanding technique is a follow-up to the first. He asks us to embrace open-ended questions that are delivered in a quick and timely manner and that are also planned in advance. Lemov encourages teachers to use his cold call technique as these questions are asked, meaning that teachers don't just call on volunteers, but on students whose hands may not be raised or who may not be expecting to be called on. This ensures a strategic sample of random students, and the responses can better inform the next teaching moves. Lemov urges us to track this data over time. For more information on targeted questioning, read about Technique 2 in Teach Like a Champion, pages 34 to 39. Another checking for understanding technique is called Show Me. Schmoker, in his book Focus, also referred to a few of these formative assessments. Lemov stresses that the teacher needs to see students actively show evidence of their understanding so that any misunderstandings become more evident to the teacher. Doug Lemov says that students can use hand signals to represent their answer. He discourages the use of thumbs up and thumbs down with a question like, "How well did you understand the problem?" Because in such an instance, we're asking for students' perceptions, not the actual answer. Instead, students can use something like the entry into rock, paper, scissors to show their answer choice. First, they'd bang their fist on the opposite palm 3 times, just like at the start of rock, paper, scissors game, and then show their answer using their fingers. Choice A would be like 1 finger in the air, choice B would be 2 fingers, and so on. Students are overtly showing evidence of their understanding when the teacher gives the signal. Students can also show their understanding by writing their answer on a slate or small whiteboard. At the teacher's signal, they would raise their whiteboard and show their answers so the teacher can quickly scan the room for evidence and for any misunderstandings. There are more high-tech forms of Show Me. The goal is to simply ensure that every student responds by giving evidence of the current understanding. For more information on the Show Me technique, check out Technique 5 of Teach Like a Champion, pages 47 to 51. Teachers that use affirmative checking are able to collect data from every student while also holding students accountable for mastering the day's learning objective. This technique also holds the teacher accountable for checking in with every student to assess their progress. One example of affirmative checking is a teacher who asks students working on challenging math problems to check in with him every 2 problems. This process allows the teacher to quickly spot and fix any misunderstandings or errors before more practice. Also, the teacher can notice trends that multiple students are making to see if reteaching needs to take place. The goal is to not have students sitting around and waiting for the teacher to come to them. Rather, it's appropriate to drive students to self-assess based on a rubric or perhaps to compare their answers to a short answer key. Students can also work in partnerships to check each other's work. For more information on affirmative checking, see Technique 6 in Teach Like a Champion, pages 51 to 54. Lemov urges teachers to build a culture of error in which students feel comfortable to not only take risks, but also to make mistakes. Such errors help us on our learning journey, and they teach us as teachers how to proceed. Lemov embraces the notion that students should also excavate errors. On page 73, he writes, "The process of looking at wrong answers and figuring out why people gave them is a powerful exercise for students." Furthermore, we must assess and move once we had excavated the errors. The teacher may choose to do a whole class reteach if there's a significant amount of misunderstanding. However, the teacher may only need to reteach only a few students. This system involves circulating around the classroom diligently and often, looking over student responses and eavesdropping as students share why they chose certain answers. It's essential to listen and look for learning so we can know if we can move on or need to move back. For more information on this technique, read about Technique 9 in Teach Like a Champion, pages 72 to 77. Let's review the 3 questions we previously looked at. We know formative assessments, or checks for understanding, show us where students are in their progress toward mastery of a learning objective. After these last 5 Teach Like a Champion techniques, you probably are feeling more comfortable with the last 2 questions. A teacher implements formative assessment often and throughout a lesson cycle. They could be as simple as, "Show me," or through the answers you get as you ask specific and well-planned questions. The purpose, then, is to make decisions based on the assessment data. A teacher might reteach the whole class, a few students, and or move on. The teacher might also adapt how the next lesson or concept is taught based on how the students responded. Let's look at an example of what formative assessments might look like in a lesson on analyzing and interpreting a poem in a 6th grade language arts class. What to do might sound like this. Students, now that we've read this poem together, I'd like you to take your whiteboard and write a response to this question. What is the theme of the poem? At which point, the students would take their whiteboards and write their responses with their markers. We'll next discuss how the teacher will get students to show their responses and then what the next teaching moves will be. Next, the teacher might say, "Students, when I say show, I want you to raise your whiteboard above your head, facing towards me. Show." At which point the teacher would scan the whiteboards for evidence of learning and any instances of misunderstandings. As a next step, what to do might sound like this. Now that you've written about a response on your whiteboard, I want you to speak with your shoulder partner about why you chose that theme. Partner A will go first and will have 45 seconds to respond. When you hear the chime, finish what you're saying and then partner B will respond. Remember to explain why you selected this theme for the poem we read. Partner A, begin. At this point, the teacher would walk around the room and listen in on partner A responding. After 45 seconds, the teacher will use a chime and then say begin, so partner B will start. The teacher will then listen to partner B's comments. In this short scenario, there were 2 basic formative assessments that the teacher did in a span of about 3 to 4 minutes. Can you identify what they were? So the first one was show me. The students wrote their themes on the whiteboards and showed them to the teacher. Then the teacher scanned the boards for evidence of understanding. The second formative assessment was when the teacher had students discuss why they chose a theme with a partner. By listening on the conversations, the teacher got valuable information on not only what the theme students chose, but why they chose that theme. Using the data that the teacher gathered during both checks for understanding, it's what comes next that's most important. To be responsive, the teacher must decide to reteach to the whole group, small group, or individually, or the teacher might reassess at a later time after more practice. Furthermore, the teacher may be able to move on to a different concept or learning target if all the students showed mastery. Doug Lemov reminds us that it's the check for understandings that are done before the bell rings that are the most important, because they drive how we'll continue our current instruction to prevent any more misunderstandings. On page 25 of Teach Like a Champion, Lemov writes, "My focus here is on the tools that teachers can use to figure things out sooner, before students leave the room and the lesson's over. This is important because misunderstandings don't merely linger, but snowball." He continues, "Recognizing and addressing them quickly keeps them from getting worse, and does so at a lower cost. A full lesson loss is a high price to pay in terms of missed learning. 10 minutes lost is an easier fix." So on this page will be a pop-up to another video which will serve as a formative assessment on formative assessments. Pause the video and click on the pop-up on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And as you watch the video, determine if the teacher is conducting a clear check for understanding through her use of affirmative checking. Wow, that video was pretty impressive. Let's reflect on the teacher's task. The teacher gave clear instructions to her students about writing their answers on a post-it note, and then students waited to be called on so she could check their work. She also redirected students, whom she did not call on, back to the carpet. Then when she looked at individual post-its, she told them to either go back and check their work or go to their seats to get started on independent practice. Last, and the part we didn't see, she took that formative assessment data and decided what her next step would be. Miss Lewis more than likely checked in with the students who needed to go back and rework their problem using independent work time. She may have led a lesson with a small group or monitored these particular students as they worked individually. By doing the affirmative checking technique, she could instantly see how her students were progressing on their mastery of the learning objective. Now that you've seen several techniques and examples of formative assessment, let's review the proficiency rubric one more time. During the demonstration lab, you'll present a 10-minute mini-lesson in which you model formative assessments and checks for understanding. You'll receive feedback based on the proficiency rubric you see on the screen. And to earn credit for this course, participants must score at the proficient or master's level. To achieve a proficient rating, the teacher must utilize 2 to 3 formative assessments and then use the data from the assessments to adapt at least one part of the remaining instruction. And to achieve a master's rating, the teacher must use also 2 to 3 formative assessments and then use that data to respond in the moment to all portions of remaining instruction. So here are some reminders and pointers as you prepare for your mini lesson. First, decide what you want your students to accomplish during your mini lesson. This will become your learning objective. Then, decide which formative assessments you'll use throughout your lesson. The amount of time before you formatively assess is really dependent on what you're asking your students to do. Remember, you want to do 2 to 3 formative assessments within your mini lesson. After you decide on your 2 to 3 formative assessments, consider how you'll use data from the assessments to inform, adjust, or adapt your remaining instruction. A responsive teacher uses the formative assessment data to decide how to proceed next. Students may need a whole group reteach, or only some students may need assistance. You can choose to change your next teaching point, or you could forge ahead with your existing plan if all students showed mastery. You should aim to formally assess 2 or 3 times in your mini lesson, using different techniques. Because they are short, usually a minute or less, you'll have time to complete several checks for understanding. Remember, the purpose of formative assessment is to adapt instruction as needed. We should never be satisfied with saying we taught it, so students should have gotten it. After your formative assessments and practice time, you'll always want to wrap up the lesson by bringing the students back together and drawing their attention back to the learning objective. Thanks for watching this course module titled Formative Assessment. It's a foundation of good instruction and gives teachers useful data along the journey to summative assessment. Good luck, and feel free to review this video at any time as you prepare for your upcoming mini lesson. Today's material referenced the books Driven by Data, Teach Like a Champion 2.0, Focus, and The First Days of School, and use downloaded images from copyright-free Google Images.